Okay, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. If you have any trouble hearing, please put a note in the chat window, and we'll make sure that the audio is working properly. Also, just wanted to say a quick welcome to everyone to our webinar today, Making Gatsby Even Greater with Themes, Better, Faster, and Flexibler. Today is April 25th, and the webinar will be about 60 minutes. We'll be joined by two excellent speakers, which I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, a couple of announcements. The webinar will be recorded, and the link to the recording will be posted on our website later today. It'll also be sent to all of the registrants via email. So if you missed any portion of the webinar, you can catch it on the recording. Also, everyone will be on mute, but if you do have questions, we encourage, a lot of questions. We'll also save time at the end of the webinar for questions. You can submit them in the Q&A window, and then we have a couple of great panelists that are joining us, Kyle Matthews and Sam Bagwat, who will be answering questions as we go. And then the presenters will also answer questions, especially those that we may not get to during the presentations. So with that, I just want to introduce both of our speakers today. Our first speaker will be Chris Biscardi. He's an independent consultant with Gatsby. And so he's had a long history with Gatsby, having been contributing since version 0.7. And he's also been working on Gatsby themes since the inception of the project. So we'll start with him today, which will also be followed by Trevor Blades. And Trevor is a designer developer with Apollo. He's based out of Vancouver, and he builds cool websites at Apollo and enjoys skateboarding. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chris, and I will make sure I give him the controls. And Chris, you'll just want to unmute yourself.
Yep, just show my screen.
Great. Yep, we can see it. Looks good.
Dope.
And Chris, do you want me to start with a polling question?
Yes, please start with the polling question.
Okay, awesome.
Slide 2 or so.
All right, so I just launched a poll, so everybody should see the question, what themes have you used in other ecosystems? So if you can take a moment to select your answer. If the answer is other, you can put your other answers in the chat window also, so we can get a few more details about other themes that you've worked with that may not be listed here. So great, we'll give you just 1 minute to fill that out, and then Chris will start his presentation right after I share the results. As soon as we have maybe 60 or 70% voted, we're at 50% now, so a few more votes, and then I'll close the poll. All right, great. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Oh, so a lot of WordPress. Some Drupal and others, so we'll have to look later and see what the others are in the chat window. But thanks for participating in that poll. All right, back to Chris.
Cool. Yeah, and I realize that many of you can actually have worked in a bunch of different platforms, so don't worry about it if you've done more than one. Yeah, Gatsby themes. What are themes? Themes are a powerful new abstraction under development for Gatsby. It's been a few months now. They allow a developer to package up a site as a standalone product for other to use. In short, themes are installable from NPM Gatsby sites. And as we go through this presentation, we'll dive a little bit deeper into what that means. So a lot of you have used themes in other platforms, such as WordPress. But what do people think of when you say themes? And one of the things that comes up quite often is the idea of token swaps. Token swaps are usually a runtime feature that have been pretty popular on blogs lately, where you can go to the top right corner of the block and you can turn it from standard light mode to dark mode. The other thing that comes up is the idea of like a CSS Zen Garden type theming approach. The CSS Zen Garden approach, if you are unfamiliar with the site, gives you basically the same HTML file, so you get the same structure, and then you can theme it by introducing a new CSS file. And these can get pretty wild and pretty exotic compared to another CSS file. And then we have the, I guess, more featureful definition of themes in WordPress and Hugo and Jekyll and things like that. These themes are usually one theme. So if you're using Hugo, you'll submodule your theme into your Git repo. So if you're using WordPress, you'll download it. You'll go to a site and pay for one. They usually come with a visual style, although some WordPress themes can come with multiple visual styles. And they usually add functionality. And that's a key point here, because adding functionality is a really important part of Gatsby Themes. So you can take basically your WordPress blog and turn it into an e-commerce store. Which brings us to what are Gatsby themes specifically. And Gatsby themes are the next level of abstraction for building and maintaining Gatsby projects. They're just as flexible as building a Gatsby project itself, while allowing us to encapsulate what flexibility in a way that is easier to consume for our peers. So if we go back to the discussion we were having before about themes, token swaps are mostly runtime. Gatsby themes can help you set up the infrastructure to support them, but token swaps are not what we're talking about when we are talking about Gatsby themes. CSS Zen Garden approach, where you can include a new CSS file or styling to completely change the representation of the site on the page, is very similar to what Gatsby component shadowing can do. But this is sort of leveled up by component shadowing. So instead of targeting divs and targeting ahref tags and spans and things like that, we can replace component-specific or content-specific components across the entire site, like a post list item or a header or a sidebar or a footer. And when compared to WordPress or Hugo themes, one main difference is that while WordPress and Hugo allow you to use, say, a single theme, Gatsby themes allow you to use as many themes as you want. You can take as much functionality or as little functionality as you need and organize them in parent-child relationships or even sibling relationships. Gatsby themes can also come with a visual style or not. And instead of just adding functionality, they let you sort of compose functionality like you have giant Lego blocks. This means that if you have a blog and you want to add an e-commerce store to it, you can just install 2 themes instead of looking for a specific theme that has everything you need. So why themes? And basically the answer to that is ease of use and creating higher level abstractions for people who build Gatsby sites. Gatsby already has a set of really nice abstractions in these low level lifecycle and action API calls. Those low level API calls build up into low level reusable chunks of functionality in source and transformer plugins. And these APIs are sort of things like onCreate node, source nodes, wrap root element, etc. But there are problems with just having plugins, right? They work really well, But if you want to use them on different sites, you have to reconfigure them. You have to know which sources to install. You have to know which transformers to install. And there are fundamental sort of problems with them where you can't have a plugin install or enable another plugin. So if you want a blog and you want a blog that talks to the Ghost CMS, transforms your data from Markdown, and then also uses Emotion to do your styling or something like that, you always have to install 3 plugins. And themes are a higher level of abstraction. It allows us to write less Gatsby config code and less Gatsby node code because we want custom-sized Lego blocks of functionality. So who are themes for? Themes are largely for people who are new to Gatsby and want to get started quickly without a difficult learning curve. Themes are also good for people with common use cases. A lot of people want to write a blog, right? A lot of people need to write documentation for their projects. And it's really nice to be able to share the maintenance burden of something like DocZ across a bunch of different people. Themes are also good for entrepreneurs. Whether you're talking about explicitly selling themes, as in the marketplace case, or even building a product that you can use in your services business. And finally, themes are also good for designers, right? Themes are good for people who don't know GraphQL or aren't as good with GraphQL as they are with, say, Sketch. And people still want to create beautiful sites, but they don't want to have to set up all of the different GraphQL calls, all of the different page scaffolding. And to just drive that point home, themes are good for novices and experts alike, right? Sometimes you just don't know how GraphQL works, and other times you just don't have time to deal with how GraphQL works. Here we have an example of someone who is fairly advanced in their knowledge of JavaScript and the tooling systems, and they still don't want to take the time to write custom GraphQL queries, and they shouldn't have to. So there are a couple use cases that I want to go over for themes. The first one is fairly simple, and it's the use case that I just showed on the last slide. I want to be able to just write some Markdown and have a blog. I don't want to have to write GraphQL queries. I don't want to have to deal with Gatsby lifecycle calls. I don't want to have to deal with Gatsby action calls. I just want to write a folder of Markdown, and I want to have a nice blog. The second use case is I have an open source project or other kind of project, and I want to write documentation. But I also want to have a blog because, you know, my project is starting to get fairly popular, and I want to keep people up to date with changelogs and things like that. The third use case is if you have either of the first two and you want to customize the brand to brand, right? You want to change the colors, you want to change the typography, changes like that. The fourth is that you can build themes with the intention to sell them, right? You can build a blog theme with the intention to sell it to premium consumers. The fifth, which I'll leave for later, since we have somebody here who is taught it, is the internal create React app use case. Since Gatsby themes are units of Gatsby site functionality, you can actually build an internal create React app project that lets you bootstrap different projects, but also retain the ability to push changes to people through npm, so that when you make updates or bug fixes and you have, say, 5, 10 more sites, they can all update just by updating their npm package. And the sixth is data sourcing. Basically a way to abstract data for public theme consumption. If you have a blog post type, you don't necessarily care whether it comes from the file system or it comes from a CMS. And when you're writing a theme, you shouldn't have to care either. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into a couple of these use cases as a way to introduce you to what using themes looks like. And this is the I want to blog use case. I just want to get started. I want to write some Markdown files. First, I initialize a new NPM project. I add Gatsby theme blog as a dependency to that project. And then in my Gatsby config, I use the experimental themes key and I use the theme name. And that's it. And now I can start writing content and I'll just have a blog. Now, this is one of the really powerful use cases for themes where I don't have to think about how the site is constructed really at all. And then, like I said before, in the use case where you have documentation and you have a blog, you can just install 2 themes, whereas some other ecosystems, you are restricted to a single theme. Gatsby themes don't restrict you really in any way about how you want to organize your code. So you'll see that experimental themes is an array. And we can just include our docz theme right next to our blog theme, and we can have both. Finally, I want to cover the branding use case because it brings up an interesting point in that Gatsby themes accept configuration. And they accept configuration the same way that plugins do, if you're familiar with the plugin ecosystem. In this case, we have Gatsby theme blog. It takes some options. So let's say Gatsby theme blog uses styled system and a theme provider to provide the tokens. We can include our colors here, and now our entire site will be rethemed with these colors. Which brings us to how do themes work? And we're going to cover 3 main areas. We're going to cover the Gatsby config, since that's the core of how themes work. And then we're going to cover overrides and configuration. And this is the, I install something, and when you install something to use it, it's never quite perfect, right? You usually want to change something about it. Since we're using npm packages and not starters, you can no longer just change the code. You now have to have different ways to override the functionality of a theme. And finally, data. And this is more of a forward-looking roadmap item that we'll cover a little bit later. And themes boil down to the Gatsby config.js. The Gatsby config is the heart of any Gatsby project. It contains our plugins, it contains site metadata, it contains a number of other things. And it's the place at which our entire site is built from. So in this case, we have a Gatsby config. We use MDX to transform our content. We use emotion to style our content. We're taking data off the file system using the file system source. And then in this case, we also have the Airtable source because we have some events and yeah, we want them on our site. So if we want to abstract Gatsby sites into units of functionality, the first thing we have to think about is how do we break up this Gatsby config into different pieces? And the way that we do that is we take a number of the plugins here, we move them into a new theme, and then we use the theme instead. And you'll see that we left the Airtable plugin here because the site happens to be the only site that we have that you have this Airtable source. Whereas all of our other sites use UDX, emotion, and the file source. So in our themes Gatsby config, since Gatsby themes are just Gatsby sites, they include all the same files in the same locations. We can add plugins that we use across all of our other projects. And congratulations, you just wrote your first theme. Everything else about themes emerges from this idea of composing blocks of lower level APIs together to create higher level building blocks. So let's talk a little bit about overrides and configuration, because not everything is perfect out of the box. Themes are configurable. So if we have Gatsby Themes Super Blog, for example, and in our blog, we want to make sure that we don't accidentally mistype any of our tags, right? We want MDX, Gatsby, and pizza, but we don't to accidentally write pizzas and have a pizza and a pizzas tag. So in this case, we pass through some options that are specific to this theme. And the way that we access those options is either in the Gatsby config, which in a theme can be a function now, whereas in a site, it's usually an object. And in this case, since we're using a function, we can now use any JavaScript logic we want, and we can push in some fanciful Gatsby plugin, validate blog post plugin, and pass in the tags so that we can do validation there. And then we return the object, and the object is just the normal Gatsby config object. In another case, we can access the theme options in any of the lifecycle methods. And the way that you access the options in the lifecycle methods is the exact same way that you would access them for a plugin. In this case, we've taken the theme options and the tags that we've passed in, and we've created a new enum using the schema customization APIs. We can then later use this enum to build up a blog post type. If we do use this enum in this way, with the configuration coming from the user, our site will not build if we use the wrong tags. We can choose our theme to make this error message nicer as we process data. But by default, the GraphQL API is restricting our ability to actually use the milk duds tag, because we don't actually have the milk duds tag. Which brings us to shadowing. Shadowing is the answer for, I don't like the navigation on my blog, or I don't like the footer on my blog, or I don't like how a specific blog post item renders, right? So all of these things are React components because we're working in Gatsby. And because they're React components, we can take the file that is in the theme. In this case, we have a file in Gatsby Themes Super Awesome in the source components directory called blogpostitem.js. And we want to replace this blog post item so that anywhere we're rendering a list of blog posts, it renders something different. So by simply creating a single file in our site source Gatsby Themes Super Awesome components directory, our entire site will now use our blog post item instead of the theme's blog post item, exactly where it was used before. Shadow data components get the same props that the original components get. They're injected into the React tree in the exact same spot as the original component. Shadowing will work for any webpacked file in the source directory, not just React components. And once again, it's a direct replacement of the file. So if you do replace a file and it's not a React component with a default export, you'll want to make sure that you mirror all of the exports from the original file. Moving into a bit more of an advanced use case, if you create a file that is shadowing a theme component, you can import the original component and extend it and re-export it. So if we decide that everywhere on our site, we don't want to show any excerpt ever, we can import the original blog post item from the theme and re-export it with our prop just spread onto it. Using this approach allows us to upgrade our theme without worrying about breaking when we do, because we haven't copied the blog post item code out and modified it. We've just extended the component in our own file. So any changes that happen to blog post item whenever the theme updates, we are still subscribed to. Which brings us to latent shadowing. If we think about Gatsby and how it can use multiple themes, as we talked about before, and we also think about how Gatsby sites or themes can shadow other themes, then we can set up our themes to shadow other themes that aren't currently installed or that could be installed. Which means that if you create a directory called Gatsby Theme Superuplog in your theme, and you have a number of files in there that shadow components from another theme, when that theme is installed alongside your theme, the files that you've created will activate and replace the other components. This is really good for theming, right? So let's say you have an e-commerce theme and a blog theme. You can release your own theme that shadows a bunch of blog components, as well as shadows a bunch of e-commerce components. And any user of your theme can choose to either have the blog just installed, the e-commerce theme just installed, or both of them, and it will work for everything. And when all else fails, if you need to override, you can fall back to the low-level Gatsby APIs. These are the onCreate pages and other lifecycle calls. That brings us to the themes roadmap and other projects that the themes team is working on. First is abstraction. And this is the effort to be able to use themes across different sources. If we have a file system source and we want to move to Ghost, or we want to move to Contentful or Datto CMS or Sanity.io or any of these other CMSs, we shouldn't have to break our theme to do that. So the data abstraction work we're working on builds on the schema customization APIs to allow that to happen. The work here is still early, it's still fairly abstract, but we do have some working code. After this slide, I'm talking about a couple of experimental projects that we're working on. Themes Core, the composition algorithm that I talked about earlier for Gatsby config, is very stable. Shadowing is also very stable. If you use these two APIs, your experience will be very stable, very good. If you start using data abstractions, they're a bit newer. While we haven't broken anything in data abstractions, we might in the future while we figure out what the abstraction should look like. And everything I'm about to show you beyond this slide is not ready for production, but is a view of the future. First is System UI, and this is a design token format spec meant to promote the interoperability of various tools around scale and value definitions. It was born out of Jackson's styled system efforts originally, and is now an open standard. Then there's DesignQL, which is a reference implementation of the System Ul Spec. It allows us to automatically generate documentation for components and provides a base for future work in the themes arena. It allows us to power iterative design, power experimentation with primitives, inline theme component editing, and also Gatsby themes can opt into using this for first-class editors. The final link in the chain for UI building is Themes UI, which is a component library that we're working on that implements the System UI and DesignQL standards. We're going to be using this theme library for the Gatsby official themes, but you're not tied to this library for your own themes. You can use whatever you want. We currently use it on Gatsby Theme Digital Garden if you like to check out what it looks like. And it comes with solutions for scoping styles, generating documentation for components, and other nice platform nice to haves. Finally, we have Blocks, which is an open source block editor backed by MDX, which is an authorable format combining Markdown and JSX. We're hoping to use this editor and to partner with third parties such as design tools and CMSs to bring this rich editing experience backed by the authorable format that is MDX to a wider audience. If you're not familiar with what a block editor is, think of products like Notion, Dropbox Paper, or Google Docs. The last project I want to talk about is some CLI improvements. Right now, if you write your own theme, you will have to think about component shadowing all in your head. And as we move into the later stages of themes existing, we need improvements that will help you do this, right? So if you want to eject a specific component, if you want to discover which components have been shadowed or which components could be shadowed, all of those things are going to live in the Gatsby CLI tool to help you as you do development. So to wrap up, Gatsby themes are composable Gatsby configs. They are configurable and shadowable, so you can override them. They're npm installable, which means you can distribute them and update them. And they're as modular or as monolithic as you want. If you're just getting started, I highly suggest creating a single theme that includes all of your functionality as you get used to the APIs. For more advanced use cases, you can start splitting into multiple different themes that depend on each other in a system. So that's Gatsby themes, a higher level of abstraction for Gatsby projects. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. And as we're getting ready to move over to our next speaker, I'm going to make presenter. Just a reminder, we've had a lot of great questions come in. Kyle and Sam are working hard to answer those questions. And so please keep your questions coming. We will have a few minutes at the end of the webinar to discuss a few of the main questions as well. So please continue to submit those. And while Trevor's bringing that up, we have another poll to launch. So this one, you should see the question now. It says, how do you usually share common elements such as styles, configuration components between related websites? So if you could put your answer in. Unfortunately, this doesn't allow you to choose multiple options, but I guess choose the one you use the most. NPM modules, Git submodules, monorepo. Maybe you don't do that, or other. If the answer is other, feel free to put the specific details of that in the chat window as well. So we have, we'll get maybe 50 or 60% voted, and then I'll close the poll and share the results. And then we'll hear Trevor's presentation. So a few more votes. We're around 40% now. Okay. All right, we're past 50%, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Looks like quite a few people aren't doing that, but the top one seems to be NPM modules, with monorepo kind of up there too. All right, thanks for participating in the poll. Now I'm going to turn it over to Trevor.
Cool, thanks. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, my name's Trevor. I'm a web developer at Apollo. Apollo is a company that makes tools that make it really easy for people to start using GraphQL in their web applications. At Apollo, we recently had an experience using Gatsby themes when we were overhauling our documentation site. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our experience, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas of what using Gatsby themes looks like in the real world, running in production by a real company. So when I joined Apollo last year, our documentation was one of the main areas of focus for me and my team. What we had at the time was a documentation site that was built using a framework that was understood by very few people at the company. In fact, I think at the time that I joined, there was one person who was familiar enough to maintain and work on the system that powered our documentation pages. It was also the nature of the system made it so that it was very difficult for us to bring in new technology, things that were circulating in the JavaScript community that we were excited about. And then on top of that, the layout and design was a bit outdated. It also was it resembled the layout and design of Meteor, which is sort of an earlier kind of version, not version of Apollo, but what the team that Apollo used to be. And I think it was time for us to have our own look and an experience that was uniquely Apollo. So what we wanted was the opposite of all of these. We wanted the docs infrastructure to be approachable to other developers. We wanted it to be easy to stay current and be able to integrate new and exciting tech into our docs. And we wanted a new design that was easily shared between all of our pages. And I'll touch on that again in a few slides. So having worked with Gatsby before, it sprung to mind as a potential solution for us. Also, for some context, Apollo's public website is built on Gatsby, so I know that there's some degree of knowledge within the company as to how Gatsby works. Also, our team is made up of a large number of React and JavaScript developers, so Gatsby as a system to build these kind of websites made a lot of sense from that standpoint. There was a lot of overlap in the skill area among our developers. Gatsby also allows us to stay current. There's support for cool things that we have our eye on, like MDX, which, as Chris mentioned in his talk, is, you can think of it as Markdown mixed with JSX. So you can include React components inline within a Markdown file to provide a really cool interactive experience in what would normally just be static content. And then on top of that, the Gatsby plugin ecosystem is constantly producing lots of new, really cool plugins from the Gatsby team and the community at large. And the last part, the shared design, I was confident in our ability to execute the design that we made, but the shared part was the only question mark there. And I knew that the sharing a Gatsby site might not be totally straightforward. And that is because our documentation is spread up across 11 GitHub repos. So each set of tools that we create, Apollo Client, React Apollo, Apollo Link, all of these different tool sets have their documentation located alongside the code. So in each repo, there's a docs directory, and that docs directory is filled with a bunch of Markdown files describing the code located in that repo. And that's really good. It allows us to be able to sort of compartmentalize these different subject matters, and when people are opening issues and stuff, they're opening them in the repos that that pertain to that code. So it's a nice organizational structure. We like it, but it makes this this docs task challenging, because it means we either need to manage one big Gatsby website that pulls in data from all of these different repos, and then produces one site, and that presents some challenges. Like when there's a copy edit on one page, does it mean that we have to then pull in everything and do another gigantic deploy every time? Or maybe there's a way that we can deploy 11 Gatsby sites separately, and that is where Gatsby Themes comes in. So I remember hearing about this, I think from there was a blog post that was made on the Gatsby blog introducing this as an experimental feature. And I thought, oh, well, that makes things really interesting. And the way that I initially thought of themes is that it's basically just a Gatsby website. Everything that you could do with a Gatsby website, you can also do in a theme. And because you can install themes on many different consumers and retain certain functionality, styles, and components, this seems like a really good candidate as a drop-in replacement for the system that we have that gave us all of those benefits I talked about a few slides ago, like the approachability and the ability to move fast and adopt new technology. So we got started. I began putting together a Gatsby site. Like I said, themes are in many ways just a Gatsby site. So I started building out a Gatsby site using dummy data. Just wanted to get something going and have it working in a way that we wanted it to, and look how we wanted it to as well. And once it was at a point that was working and we really liked, I stripped out all the dummy data and published that as a theme to NPM, called it Gatsby Theme Apollo, and went over to one of our pre-existing docs repos and tried using it. So I just npm install Gatsby and Gatsby Theme Apollo. I make a Gatsby config.js in the root of the docs directory in there, and it just provides some configuration options, like the title for the subject matter that was being discussed, a description for meta tags and whatnot, and a whole bunch of other things that tell the theme where to look for files and what to do with them, essentially. And this worked really well. It behaved exactly as we expected it to, and things were going really great. And then a new project was put on our plate. This project was kind of more or less came out of the blue, and it was a website that we needed to produce that the timeline was very short, and we wanted the layout to be consistent with the new docs layout that our designer Jess had made, but with a few minor changes. So to me, this seemed like a really good opportunity to use our new Gatsby theme and put it to the test. See if this idea that we've been working with will actually work in practice. But to do this, there was some changes necessary. So as I mentioned before, this theme that we've been developing was completely centered around generating docs from Markdown, given some configuration options. This new site wasn't going to work under those same constraints. So what we ended up doing was splitting that theme into two. We have Gatsby Theme Apollo, which I'll refer to as our base theme. This just contains some, like, the most basic boilerplate and color variables so that all of the visuals remain on brand, and some sort of basic typography styles, and things like that are going to be shared globally across the site. When I talk about boilerplate, in this example, I'm specifically talking about React Helmet, emotion for styles. I should mention React Helmet is for injecting tags into the head of your page. So really useful for any website that you make. So React Helmet, emotion for styling, SVGR so that we can import SVGs as React components, and a typography plugin that just sets sort of a base style sheet reset for us. And that's pretty much all that we needed to bootstrap any website. And this theme also exported from its main entry point a set of common components. So things like, as I've mentioned here, a header, a sidebar, some navigation links, little footer navigation, things like that might be useful when building other sites. And it's kind of like a sandbox. We give you all the tools that you need to build sites, and sort of a baseline foundation to build upon. And you can build your site like you would any other Gatsby website. Create a pages directory, add some JavaScript files to that pages directory, and import these building blocks and just piece it together. Our second theme was basically all of the generation code from the original theme that we had made, and just stripped out into its own contained package. It also inherits everything from the base theme. So Gatsby Theme Apollo Docs, in its Gatsby config, it has an experimental themes option, and we just pass in Gatsby Theme Apollo to that. So we get everything from the base theme plus a bunch of other stuff. Pretty cool. And here's what it would look like, for example, making the homepage for Principled GraphQL. We would just have, this is an oversimplified example, but the base theme would export a few basic building blocks, and we can just put it together, and we can repeat this process across, you know, whatever sites we need to. But this worked really, really well for this project. It enabled us to produce something of high quality and something that was consistent with what we were already working on, but in a very short timeline and with very little extra effort. In fact, oh, I should have mentioned here also, this was the only change necessary for consumers of the new docs theme. But the work that we did on principled GraphQL was really great because we got to bring along all of the work that we did on those base theme components, like fleshing out the sidebar navigation functionality, tweaking some of the base styles for better typography and readability, and also adding a bunch of mobile styles. All of the work that we did in those areas for the principled GraphQL website, we got to carry along with us back to the docs when we transitioned back over there, because the docs theme inherits everything that the base theme provides us. And so that was really great. We were excited that the concept worked. It was very promising, but there was still lots left on our plate. So fast forward a couple months, I guess, and we had a theme that we were ready to now deploy across all of our docs pages. So the initial launch the goal was to establish parity with what our docs provided before, with some improvements to layout, discoverability, things like that. We weren't updating content, and in this initial version, we relied on a lot of custom code in some of the Gatsby node hooks, which is fine. It works really well, and we used Renovate in our case, but you can use Greenkeeper. I'm sure there's other alternatives of an NPM dependency manager, but that whenever we publish a new version of any of our docs, any of our themes, whether it's the docs theme or the base theme, all of the consumers of our themes will get updated automatically, and a PR will get created and the PR will get merged automatically over given some period of time. And that was really awesome. It just makes deploying changes feel very fast and automatic. So just to recap, what we achieved out of this is a system that is now approachable to other developers. The whole thing is built in React, in JavaScript, and using technology from Gatsby that more than one person, I'll say, was familiar with. In fact, I think it's becoming more common to understand these things. And using Gatsby and using React allows us to stay current, integrate new technology, and it really is a thriving space, and we're excited to see all of the things that people come up with and see if there's a way to integrate those into our themes in the future, which we can now. And lastly, we have a way to share layout and design and components and styles across all of our docs websites really seamlessly. So what's next for us is hitting on that second point. We want to stay current. One of the things that we have our eyes set on right now is supporting MDX in our docs, and what that will translate to is better pieces, like better code blocks, having the ability to switch between different languages, like between JavaScript and TypeScript, have interactive components within our docs, and then obviously the point that I mentioned before, actually taking time to improve the content, make it more accessible and more interactive is the goal. But using Gatsby themes has certainly helped us achieve those three things that I laid out here, and we're super stoked for it. Also, I should mention I have a few links. If anybody wants to check out the work that we did with the themes that we built, you can find them on GitHub at apollo-GraphQL/Gatsby theme Apollo. If you want to see how we used it in the Principled GraphQL website that I mentioned, you can find it at apollo-GraphQL/Principled GraphQL. And I encourage you all to check out our docs and hopefully you like it. If you have feedback, we'd always love to hear it. That's all I got.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Really appreciate that. We've had quite a few questions come in that I know the panelists have been trying to get to. Really quickly, I just put a link in the chat window and wanted to share this as well. If you're interested in getting started with Gatsby themes, we have a Gatsby themes doc site at gatsbyjs.org/docs/themes. So that link is in the chat window as well. Please go there, learn more about it, and there should be lots of resources there to dig in a little bit deeper. And with the 2 minutes we have left, I'd love to turn it over to Chris. I know you've had a chance to maybe look through the questions. If there's any remaining thoughts you want to bring out, or any kind of summary of some of the basics, I'm going to make you the presenter as well if there were anything you wanted to share.
Sounds good. So after reading through a bunch of the questions, I just want to reiterate what Gatsby themes are now that we've let everybody talk and everybody listen to all of the content today. Gatsby themes are composable Gatsby configs. They are UI focused in that you can offer a collection of components and you can let users shadow them to override various components. They are configurable in the same way that any plugin is. They're NPM installable, which allows you to upgrade them over time, just like Create React App does. And they're as modular or as monolithic as you want them to be. You can build one giant theme, or you can have a bunch of different themes that are meant to work together. And yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Chris. So thank you to everyone who joined us today, especially to our speakers, Chris and Trevor, and to our panelists, Kyle and Sam, for jumping in on all those questions. Remember, the webinar is recorded. The link to the recording will be available on our website a little bit later today. It'll also be sent to everybody who registered via email. And also, if you want to get started with Gatsby themes, just go to gatsbyjs.org/docs/themes, and you can learn a lot more. So thanks again, everyone, for joining.